Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Conversations with Cobb. I am the MC. My name is Joe Nagel, and I am joined with our host, Michael Cobb, as well as our other special guest, Kathy Cook. But before we get into the introductions, I just want to remind those that are joining that there's a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, so feel free to find that. And then while Mike and Kathy are chatting, feel free to pose any questions you have, and then we'll leave some time at the end for Q&As, and we'll go through those and get those addressed. But now I'll turn it over to Mike Cobb, our host.
Good, Joe. Thank you very much. Really happy to have Kathy on. I see Karen Rich has joined us as well. Hello, Karen. Nice to have you with us today. Kathy, it really is a pleasure. I was enjoyed our time together in Nicaragua, getting to know you. I'm really happy that you were able to make that trip and see for yourself what we kind of thought was true, but we weren't 100% sure. Karen brought us this opportunity to look at the EMF levels in Nicaragua about a little over a year ago. And so we kind of tested it with some of our own equipment, and you came down with some professional equipment, professional expertise, and did your own readings. But it was for us very wonderfully confirming. I wouldn't say surprising, because I think we believed the numbers we had, but the confirmation was wonderful. And so maybe we could just start there. Tell us about maybe your trip to Nicaragua, a little bit about your background. You're part of the Building Biology Institute, and came highly recommended by a lot of folks to help give the expertise and the confirmation of the kinds of technical information that people have to make a good decision. So anyway, welcome, and maybe you could just pick up there, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks, Mike. I thoroughly enjoyed my time in Grand Pacific as well. And I was really excited about the readings that I got. Of course, coming down, I was a little nervous. What if this doesn't test out like we want it? What if there is an anomaly somewhere? So I was really hoping that we would get the results that I did. And so jumping back to one of your previous question, I've been working as a building biologist since about 2017, 2018, and testing properties and homes for people to help them to reduce their electromagnetic exposure, because unfortunately many more people are becoming sensitive every day, because we have exponentially higher exposures than we ever have before. So it's unfortunately a necessity. And so when I think I initially heard maybe from you, Karen, yes, about the opportunity that you were in conversation with Mike and his team about the community, I was super excited about it, because we need this. So yeah, I went down the first week in January, and I do understand that there is a lot of concern by interested parties, because there is a cell tower a mile away. And so people are rightly so concerned about that. And I was too. But I was extremely happy that the readings I got in the area where this community will be, it was extremely low, much lower than almost anywhere I've tested in the US. So yeah, and then I tested the electric fields, magnetic fields, dirty electricity. Of course, there is none of that at the site at this time, because there's no infrastructure, but we wanted to make sure there's no anomalies. So with the radio frequency being super low and everything that we plan to do for shielding and setting up the infrastructure, I think it's going to be great. And I was really happy with the results that we got.
Well, yeah, and thank you. And I think one of the other things that you really enjoyed was meeting some of the other folks down there, Grant Montgomery, Sasha Yates. I mean, the people who are already living on site, who already have a real sense of how healing this property has been for them because of the naturally low EMF readings. But the community, maybe you could touch on that just for a second too, because I think, look, there are probably many places in the United States and Canada, around the world, where you can go and live with a very low EMF rating, right? I mean, out in the middle of nowhere. but that's not a community, right? You don't only have neighbors and friends and activities and things that make a real cohesive, wonderful place to live. And I think that was a big part of what you found at Grand Pacifica was a community of people who already get it, right? And it's wonderful. You know.
100%. And I'm glad that you asked that, because that was kind of not even an afterthought, but it was a feeling that I was having, but not really recognizing it while I was there. Right. So, and after the fact, in hindsight, it was like, oh, that's one of the reasons why my trip was so great, because you are among like-minded people, right? And we all know, everybody on this call right now knows how it is to be living wherever you're living, and for people to think you're crazy, and people to dismiss you and tell you it's all in your head, or it's not true, or Google says it's safe, or whatever. Meanwhile, we're suffering and we feel crazy, or we're struggling in many ways, not only from the
Right.
EMF exposure physically, but mentally, and we lose community, and maybe we lose friends and family, and it can be really devastating for people. So 100%, Mike, like having people there, I mean, Sasha and Grant, everybody was awesome.
Yep.
And so yeah, it felt like a community, and I didn't have to explain myself.
Right.
I didn't have to, talk about this meter I'm waving around. Like everybody just knew, and they got it, and I was accepted. And that was a really, really nice piece of it. And I think that is key to this community, is that, just like you said, I mean, I've got clients that live in their car in the middle of some in the desert, some in the mountains, wherever, but right,
Yeah.
they don't have a social outlet. And that's really, really important.
It is. And, one of the things that we've been hearing, and look, I do understand very clearly that there's no way to serve everybody, right? There's no way. And some people's sensitivities are so extreme that any amount of EMF or dirty electric, or any of those things really can affect them, severely or adversely. And so there's some piece of the population we can't serve. But the fact that we're able to serve so many people with something that's really, really good. It's not perfect, but it's really, really good. And maybe we could kind of get into what that means in terms of numbers, right? I think a lot of people, in fact, I'm sure most people on this call understand the numbers. Generally people wouldn't have a clue what the different numbers and readings and metrics are, but folks here would. So if you don't mind, maybe you could kind of walk through some of those actual technical terms and technical metrics for the folks here today, because I think everyone here does understand it.
Yeah. So with radio frequency, typically in building biology, we're measuring in microwatts per square meter. And so, I walk into an average house in the US and I'm getting 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, a million next to their router, crazy levels of radio frequency. My goal is of course, is to get it as low as possible wherever I am. And in building biology, we say that under 1 microwatt per square meter is no concern, that almost no one will react to under 1 microwatt per square meter. Of course, there are some that do, but 99% of us are just fine at that level. And then at 10, it's 1 to 10 is like, boy, if I can get it under 10, I'm stoked. And that's very hard. If we live in the city, anywhere in the city, and we've got services, it's going to be almost impossible to get it under that level. Sometimes you can, depending on, on how far out you live. But if you have cell service, that's not possible. So in the ISLA community, the proposed area, I was getting, in some areas, I was getting consistently 0.1 to 1. And kind of in the center of the area, very consistently. And I tested over the course of 4 days. So I went out a couple times a day over the course of 4 days to make sure, during the week and the weekend, to
Yep.
make sure that I got a representative, sample of different times of the day and different, when it was busier, et cetera. So in some of the perimeter lots, I was getting maybe up to 4, which again, I was super happy about. There was one spot on one day, I got the highest peak I recorded was 25. And
Okay.
that I think was a bit of an anomaly. Apparently there was a wedding party coming in and there was some high traffic during that time, but that was on the very corner of a lot. Everything else, you know, 0.1 to 5, 0.1 to 4 throughout,
Okay.
which very difficult to achieve in a
Yeah.
populated area.
Right. Again, these numbers are meaningful because they are extremely low and would provide the overwhelming majority of people who are affected, a safe place to live and heal. Is that a fair statement?
I think so, yeah. And you know, with the way that the homes are going to be built, with the cinder block and
Yes.
plaster and metal roofs, I expect it to be nearly zero inside the houses.
We're right, because this is a reading out in the open. There's no mitigation, right? I mean, this is just
Right.
wide open, right? And so, yeah, with the building methodologies, one of the nice things, and I'd like to save the idea of building materials generally to later, but on a very specific note, the types of building materials that you build your basic house from, concrete, and rebar, and then reinforced with the pouring, the mitigation of the radio frequencies is much lower. You mentioned that right now there's no dirty electricity, and we do have a power line on the property, and you measured that, and it's well grounded, I guess. Wasn't that, I think, well grounded, but
Yeah. So it's yeah. So we've got the magnetic fields, electric fields, and dirty electricity that could all come from that.
right.
So yes, you know, there's different ways of running that infrastructure if you're doing it in ground overhead, but I tested the power in all of the areas where existing homes are, just to get a sense of what's the electric company doing, you know, how are they running these lines, are the loads balanced? And I got really good readings all over. So
Yeah,
very, so we
exactly.
can hope that, you know, they're going to follow the same protocols that they do, and it will be low when this
Well,
infrastructure is
here's the really cool thing, Kathy. We are the electric company
right.
inside Grand Pacifica. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
being able to design this according to your standards, I know you've already been working with Grant Montgomery, the architect who's designed some of the home models for us, and to use the best building parameters, I guess, where you run the electric, where you put the panel boxes. I mean, those kinds of things, how you ground the system and balance the system so you don't get dirty electricity, all of those kinds of elements within the home, you've helped Grant do. But then there's also the elements outside the home, how we run the electricity, and it will be underground, to the homes, where we will have a large solar field, but the solar field will be off-site. So your inverters, which can produce dirty electricity, don't have to, but can generally produce dirty electricity, would be off-site, so that the power actually then coming into the neighborhood underground would be, balanced, and very low levels of dirty electricity, along with inside the house, the kinds of shielding, the kind of construction materials. I think those are the things that you, as a building biologist, working with our infrastructure and home construction and home design teams, really will ensure that somebody does end up with a home that's very low EMF naturally, but then also with the additional mitigating factors of the construction methodologies.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I mean, not to mention and I think Karen can speak to this too, but the land there, just the beach, you know,
Yeah.
the air quality, the energy there is just on its own extremely healing and beneficial. So we've got both things here, which for me are equally as important. So yeah.
Right. And I'm glad you mentioned the beach. We didn't even talk about that, right? But I mean, the ISLA neighborhood is about 600 yards from a beautiful, wonderful swimming beach, about 1,000 yards from a surfing beach for folks who love to surf. And as Karen pointed out, which I did not know, the incredible properties of black sand, of volcanic, magnetically charged black sand. And parts of these beaches are exactly that. And they're, 600 yards away. I mean, 500, or a 5-minute stroll, right? I mean, so you're at the beach, and it's Pacific Ocean, and it's 80 degrees. So it's warm Pacific Ocean, which is kind of nice too. Yeah. And did you go swimming? Did you take a surf lesson while you were down there? I can't remember.
I didn't. I went
Did
swimming
not.
every day. I'm
Okay.
surfing is, I'm not going to do very good at that.
All right. Well, maybe we'll take one together sometime when we're
Okay.
down there. We'll get Joe out
Fine.
there too. Karen, we'll figure out how to take surf lessons. Um, so I think those were sort of the main points I wanted to get to. I think there were a couple comments that were brought up by Karen, and it was geothermal and geopathic stress. I know that that's a topic that's been brought up in some of the questions through the different presentations and things like that. So maybe you could just touch on that for a moment and address that for the folks that have thought about that.
Yeah. So geopathic stress is another form of EMF, but it's basically the energies of Earth via ley lines, underground water, different energies that are flowing under the Earth, which for some people is they can make people react, and some people are sensitive to this. It's very interesting. Sometimes, like if you're hiking or wherever you are and you see a tree and it's all knotty and gnarled, and sometimes if you look at that tree and you kind of do a 360, and you might see certain trees in a line with that same type of
Wow.
deformation, I guess,
Uh-huh.
then
Okay.
then that's a sign that there's some kind of energy, geopathic stress under that area. It's pretty interesting
That's
when
very
you
interesting.
yeah.
Yeah. That's
And
very
so
interesting.
I unfortunately, building biology does not train us in that method.
Okay.
But there's some very skilled people around the country that can measure that, and some people teach themselves with dowsing rods or
Yeah.
pendulums. Very
Okay.
interesting. So so it was not tested, but
Okay.
if anybody is interested in, if they're going to get a lot or home, I think it would be very, very valuable to get that tested just on your area where you're living, so you know where to put your bed. And I've got a colleague actually who does this remotely.
Oh,
His
okay.
name is Damon, and it's fascinating. He's brilliant. He can pull up the image on Google Earth, and he can look at a small little area, and he'll tell you exactly where the energies are, and then he helps you mitigate it. Actually,
Okay.
he does some geometric design with rebar, and you can put rods in your home, in the earth outside your home in certain areas, and then that will transfer it in a different direction and away from where you're spending time. So anybody could do that if they're interested in that or concerned about it. It can be addressed at any time. So
And would you work with, say, Grant, the architect, to implement that into the home design, or is that something you do in the ground? I'm a little
yeah,
lost.
you could do it in the ground. So let's say your house is
Okay.
built, and then you can have him do this, and he can say, okay, put the rod there, put your other rod here. So it can be done before or after, either way.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, obviously this is a brand new neighborhood, so if folks want to do it, it may make more sense to try to get it done ahead of time, right? And
Yep.
put that out there. So, yeah. Karen, really glad to have you with us. I don't know if you have any questions or comments. I mean, you spent some time in Nicaragua at Grand Pacific. You went swimming every day. I know the first time I met you in person, you were coming back from the beach. So, any questions or thoughts that you want to drop into this conversation, and then we'll look for some questions. I hope some questions have come in. If not, we have some other topics that we can certainly talk into as well. But Karen, welcome. Join the conversation with any thoughts or questions. Oh, you're muted.
Okay, usual on top
We
of
can hear you. All right.
Hey. I'm guessing there's a lot of people that are going to watch this in the replay link who aren't live.
Okay.
And I think something that would be interesting to explain, I know I'm really interested in understanding more about it, Kath, is the directionality that has to do with the fact, there is a cell tower on the property that freaks a lot of people out when they hear that. I was not aware of being affected by it, but I think you have an explanation for why that is, why it doesn't affect you when you're walking around the property or at the beach or around and all that
Yeah.
stuff.
So that's a really great question. So you've got your tower, right? And I wasn't prepared for this, but you have your tower and the antennas on the tower, right? And so the antenna is this little, usually a rectangular box. And then when the antenna, if it's pointed in this direction, it's not emitting behind it, right? It might have a little bit to the side, but it's mostly, it's going to be at an angle and it's going to come out like this. And you know, just maybe barely a little bit of side scatter, but it's not, it can't go behind itself, right? It's only going out. So the antenna that's on this property, all of the tower that's on the property, all of the antennas are pointing away from the ISLA area. So that's why we're getting so little, and it is a mile away, which is also helpful. So that's why there's so little over in the ISLA community, because there are no antennas pointing towards it or even to the side of it. They're pointing to where the houses already exist on the property. And I do get measurements outdoors, you know, towards the already developed communities, but not in the area where ISLA is, because of that directionality.
Well,
so that is a really important consideration.
It is. And Kathy, thanks for mentioning that. And the other thing I'll just talk about on top of this is, just like the electric utility, we are also, you know, in charge of the telecommunications utility. And so for someone to come in and go, oh no, we're gonna change where the cell tower is, we're gonna change the direction, I'm gonna do this. Well, they can't do that because it's ours, right? We control that. And so that's the nice thing about being in a, you know, a structured community where the developer has these kinds of controls over utilities, because we can ensure that no other body, whether governmental or commercial, comes in and changes these things after the fact. Because at the end of the day, if, you know, we're building a wonderful haven for people and we want to protect that. And as Karen, you've mentioned many, many times, there are hundreds of thousands, probably millions of people who are affected in this way. And to the extent we can provide that safe haven, provide that community where people can come and really be themselves, right? Like-minded and just be themselves in a place of healing, that gives us the ability to continue to serve folks in that way. And so, yeah, having the ability to control the infrastructure rollout, the telecommunications rollout is critically important, and we have that.
Yeah, I think that's I think everyone's biggest question is, well, it's great now. What about 5 years? What about when everybody wants to put towers up? But that's not going to happen.
They can't, right?
Yeah.
They can't, private property. So, yeah.
I have more questions.
There's a surprise, Karen. No, come on, this is good. I'm good. Thank you for joining.
I don't want to jump in line if there's other people ahead of me.
Karen, you're good at the moment. Just a reminder, everyone, there's a Q&A box at the bottom. If you wave your mouse around or tap on your screen, you should be able to see that. Feel free to put in any questions. You know, specifically more so towards what Kathy's talking about. We did a conversations with Cobb a couple weeks ago with Karen, kind of talking about Grand Pacifica and Nicaragua in general. And in a few weeks, we're having another one with Grant, who's the architect. So if it's more so related to Kathy and the EMF, I think that's the best questions. But we also have her full report on our website as well. So if you really want to dive into the weeds, you can do that. Obviously, you know, on a call like this, you can't get into everything. But yeah, if you have any questions, we'd be happy. But Karen, you know, feel free to fire away at the moment.
Okay.
1 second before you, one split second. Joe, thank you for mentioning that. The report that Kathy put together is a PDF, and it's there as a link that you can download it, so you can get Kathy's full report in its entirety. So yeah, thank you. Go ahead, Karen. Yep.
So Kath, I do not have the kind of mind that works like yours. I think you're so smart. So thank you for being patient with me. One of the things I'm curious about, like for instance, the US compared to Nicaragua, I was so excited to find out a month or so ago that as of right now, Starlink is not allowed in the airspace over Nicaragua. So does that make a difference when you're taking readings? Because I think Starlink is pretty much everywhere else, right? So
Yeah.
how much of a concern do we
I
need
mean,
to be about that?
yes and no. I mean, it's different meters, right? So I didn't bring meters in the millimeter. I didn't bring a meter in the millimeter wave range because there was no need to. And I was trying to be very stealth with my equipment because I didn't want it to get confiscated. So I didn't take millimeter wave readings, but by the time the satellites get to Earth, it's so little. Not, I mean, people react to it, but it's so little that we're barely registering it on our equipment regardless. Now, if I had a Starlink dish right next to me and, that was activated and getting a signal, that's going to be a little different. And I could get readings from that, but, the infrastructure isn't there. So I think it is a big deal because in some areas of the country, like I go to Jackson Hole once in a while and do assessments, and it's very sparse and rural, and a lot of people have Starlink. Well, if, 15 of my neighbors have Starlink, then my exposure is obviously going to be higher. So, at some point, a lot of us are going to have it, and it is going to make a difference. So I think it's great that they don't have it there, and I definitely think it's going to make a difference.
And even if Nicaragua were to change, or Starlink, whoever says, we're not doing it in Nicaragua, if that changes, we are going to have in place covenants and restrictions for this neighborhood. For example, nobody can, no cell phone use, right? So you can't be out and about in the neighborhood with a cell phone. And it would include things like Starlink antennas. So we're going to preserve that status right on through in that neighborhood and future neighborhoods with those types of rules and regulations that again preserve what it is today into the future. So yeah.
Okay, so Starlink is something you have to invite, like you do with a Wi-Fi router. It's not something that's just beamed on us
Well, a
automatically.
little of both. So
Okay.
it will be there, but you will concentrate it if you're inviting it in,
Okay.
right? And and yeah, so it's hard to it's hard to measure it if there's no dish or nothing inviting it. But by the time it gets down here, it's very difficult to actually register it right now, that is. But right, if I had the dish calling on it, then I could get in the beam, right, and I could measure it that way.
Okay, so to Mike's point, there would just be some guidelines in place where people just couldn't use Starlink as an option for connecting to the internet.
Right.
Yeah, and there's going to be metal roofs, so
Okay.
Right.
it's going to block it.
And there is internet because we have fiber. So we should mention that, right? Every home will be serviced with a fiber optic drop that can then be taken to various points in the home via Ethernet wires. So the homes will be wired literally for internet via a fiber connection back out to the backbone. So yeah, so everybody who have internet, it just will be wired. Yeah. Joe, any questions at your end?
There was a question regarding hurricanes. So Mike, maybe you want to touch upon that as well as building materials and qualities and things like that.
Certainly. Up until this moment, there have been no recorded hurricanes on the Pacific coast of Nicaragua. It doesn't mean that there wouldn't be, but in 500 years of watching, recording, there haven't been. The building standards actually are seismic because it's part of the Ring of Fire from Alaska down to Chile through California. I mean, it's part of the Ring of Fire. And so it's a seismic zone. So the actual engineering standard is a seismic standard. The good news about that is that standard, except for windows, you don't put in impact windows, right? But you could actually put in impact windows if you wanted to for hurricane. But the structure itself, because it's built out of solid concrete, reinforced block poured with the rebar, it's a fully seismically stable home, which would not, and nothing would happen to the home in the hurricane. And if you wanted to upgrade the windows to an impact window, that would be fine as well. So yeah, I think that answers the question.
Well, I'm not seeing any other questions at the moment. So if you guys want to ask a few more questions, feel free to. Otherwise, you can do your closing remarks.
Well, we're right at 4:30, which I'm okay to stick around a little longer. Karen, if you have another question. We're going to impose upon Kathy to stick around another minute or two, maybe. But if not, we can certainly wrap up. All of this information is available as a download. We'll have this as a replay. And then if people have questions that are watching this, or you're watching the replay and it wasn't covered, reach out to Joe. Joe will either know the answer, or he'll reach out to Kathy, Karen, Grant, somebody in the community that we're working with to get the answer to your question. I think, Karen, you've said it best. I mean, we really want to help a lot of folks find a way that works for them. And we're here to help answer the questions and make that happen. But
So right as I said that, we had a few come in, so maybe we'll just get those addressed real fast, so that way
let's do it.
get those answers. So one asks about sea level and plot maps with surf line indicated. I'm not sure I quite understand that either, but maybe we'll just touch upon the sea level, or maybe the level at which
Sure.
the homes are.
All homes are at 7 meters, so 22, 23 feet above sea level or higher. And we have the topography for that. So yeah, all the homes were placed at a 7-meter contour or higher. And I don't know what the highest ones are, but anyway, so I mean, we may see some sea level rise, but at 20 feet, there are going to be a lot bigger problems than ISLA. So anyway, yeah.
Certainly. And then the other question about the surf, I don't specifically understand it, but we do have two surf waves on the property. One is a more advanced one called the meat grinder. That's a pretty advanced one. And then there's Asachio Beach, which has really great beginner waves. So, people have their options depending on where on the spectrum they are. There's another question that has a couple questions in it. And I think, Kathy, they're probably directed at you. One asks about how far can one go with earth acupuncture on their lot?
That's an interesting term to use. I have not heard that before, earth acupuncture, but I'm assuming we're talking about geopathic stress. And how far, as in how deep or to what extent? I mean, that would be a question for my colleague Damon, who knows more about the geopathic stress than I do. I mean, I've had many of my clients use his services remotely, and they've been pretty amazed, very, very pleased with the results. So, if needed, you can always reach out to me and I can connect you with Damon if you want to get a better idea of that.
Perfect. And then there's a question regarding building materials. I think we'll cover that more with Grant. Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but at some point we will have a list of those materials, as well as, things like the furniture packages and appliances. But I think that's a better topic for our next conversations with Cobb. And the last one, Mike, real fast, it talks about community dispute resolution. I know you touched upon the covenants and restrictions, but I guess, where does it end? What's the end all be all for that?
Sure. At the end of the day, the type of title, and when you move into ISLA neighborhood as an owner, right, that we will have rental properties as well, but let's make the assumption that you're an owner, right? You own the land. You own the property via a title called horizontal property regime. It's part of a public title, escritura publica. It's a special type of escritura publica, public title in civil law called horizontal property regime. And it's in some ways, it's much like we have in the United States for a condo association, for example, where you own your condo, right? But you have to share ownership of the rest of the building with other people. It's similar to that. In this case, however, horizontal property regime, let's say you have a property that's a quarter acre. I'm just making something up. You own that quarter acre along with nobody else. It's yours. You are the 100% owner of that quarter acre. However, the street in front of your home, the sidewalk, the path, the park, that ownership is owned by all owners together, much like a condo building would be, right? But you own the quarter acre. That's your dirt. That's your property. But the rest of the common area is owned in common with the rest of the other owners in an undivided status under horizontal property regime. The other thing about horizontal property regime is it gives legal recourse to enforce the rules and regulations. And so the rules and regulations that are set are what you agree to when you purchase your property. And if you violate those rules, the rest of the community has legal recourse to make you remove your Starlink dish, for example, or if you put a router outside your home, or you're walking around with a cell phone, those types of things. I guess the resolution disposition on that would be legal. I don't think in very many cases it would ever get there. I can't imagine somebody coming to this community and putting a router outside their house, or walking around with a cell phone and being disrespectful to say, well, I'm going to keep it up, right? I think if people said, hey, what are you doing? I'd be like, oh, sorry, I'm taking it down. I don't know what got in me, right? Can't imagine somebody doing it in the first place, right? But if that were to happen, I think that generally social pressure and just general human consideration and communication resolves 99% of all issues, right? But if somebody were to just be blatantly a jerk and say, yeah, screw you, there is, through the horizontal property regime, the ability to take legal recourse. I really don't see that happening, but it is contractual. Those rules are out there, and when you own a piece of property, when you buy that piece of property, you are agreeing to them contractually, and so is the next buyer. This is really important. So the nice thing about horizontal property regime is the contract doesn't just bind the first buyer. If I buy it, I agree to those terms, and then I sell it to Joe, and Joe says, well, I'm putting up a cell tower. I'm putting a router out. He can't, because the title itself binds you to those rules. So that's actually the far more important part of horizontal property regime, is it's the binding of the rules into the future buyers, who you would have no direct contractual relationship with as the initial seller. A very, very important distinction in civil law. In common law, you can have rules that run with the title, but in civil law, you cannot. The title itself must encompass those rules. I know I'm getting down into the weeds a little bit, but this is critically important to preserve the intent into the future. And it's the only way that can happen. But I think that, again, most people are going to want to opt into this because they want to be a part of it, and they would be respectful of the rules and the needs of their fellow citizens. And I think in a very rare few cases it might not be that way, but there is a legal means to resolve those, should that ever happen.
Yeah, and that's definitely the very last resort that we want to, have people go down. I mean,
Yeah.
like Mike said,
Yeah.
simple discussions, even arbitration, that's much preferred. I mean, that no one wants to get to that extent. But I see one more question. If it's okay to ask, it has to do with livestock and restrictions on things like chickens. I don't know if we've planned any of that yet, but we have a large property and are doing a lot with food resiliency. But Mike, I don't know, do you have any insight on that as of yet for the ISLA community?
Yeah, we don't, and that would be part of the rules as we get them set out. And so we've started to circulate a draft set to some of the folks, Grant, Sasha, some of the other members of our advisory committee. So those rules are in progress right now, and we will have a full set by the end of May, which is when somebody would have to, look at that and say, well, I agree with this, I don't agree with this. Joe, you mentioned the agro sustainability part. Absolutely. We've got 2,500 acres, I guess, maybe about 500-600 of them is developed. So we've got about 2,000 acres left. We already have cattle on property. We've got corn, sorghum, got huge orchards. We've got bees. We're talking with the gentleman to bring him in to actually start to make that a lot more cohesive, build up our own internal food production, part of which would be livestock. I could see where we as a development company might say, hey, look, we'll allocate, an acre over here for chickens or livestock of some kind. And if you wanted to, rent a small piece of land, or it'd be minimal, we're not talking about making money from it, but to have it be somewhere where it wasn't part of the neighborhood. I don't know that would be a prohibition in the neighborhood. Again, those rules are being discussed right now and laid out, but we are huge advocates of agro resiliency and a large measure of sustainability. if it came to that. So yeah, we'll keep everybody posted on that as we get those concepts defined.
Can I
Awesome.
ask one more question?
Sure.
Kath, I'm
Yeah.
wondering about the solar panels and the inverters, because I know that there's a clean way to have solar power, and then there's a way that creates dirty electricity. And I've been so confused about that. And for the people that join the replay,
Yeah.
can you explain that a little
really
bit?
good question. So it comes down to, there's a couple manufacturers out there that have cleaner inverters than others, actually. So, there's I don't know if this is an appropriate time to discuss different brands, but there's brand here that I've tested many, and it's like I hardly get anything off of them. So my hope is that we can source those. And I mean, one of my colleagues in building biology works for a company that has great inverters. So it's my hope that those are the ones we can source. So
So
that
it's not the panels themselves
Mm-mm.
over you or
No.
near you that are causing problems. It's how they're converting the solar power into electrical power.
They're converting direct current to alternating current.
Okay.
And so it's that conversion that then creates the dirty electricity or the harmonics. So if we can source these cleaner inverters, which I don't know why we wouldn't, then it's not going to be much of a problem. And we're also going to have a filtering configuration at the panel for anybody who chooses to add that additional measure. And the wires are going to be shielded inside the home.
Right.
So
so to answer the question, Nicaragua does not prohibit the import. So I think import whatever inverters we want. I mean, that's pretty normal. If you can't find it in Nicaragua, you can source it externally and have it imported in. And a lot of the hardware stores, or in this case, probably a solar provider would do that. The area of ISLA is actually very treed and wooded, and it would be challenging, if not impossible, to get any kind of solar efficiency in that neighborhood because of the forest that's there. And so what we've done is we've allocated a piece of property about 200 yards away in an open field that would be where somebody could. And by the way, there'll be regular power coming, so you don't have to be on solar. Solar is an option. Solar is something that if somebody says, well, I want to be 100% renewable, I want to be 50% renewable, whatever that number is. The allocation of the land allows for these solar panels to be put in, the inverters to be put in over there, so that any dirty any noise, electrical noise coming from that would be a couple hundred yards away. Then that power would be run underground into the home through the filters, and then through the home design, which we'll talk about next week on the conversation with Cobb with Grant, the architect, how those different elements interplay with the design of the home and things like that. So solar is an option. We've had a lot of people say, well, look, if I can buy 10 panels and 4 batteries and be totally, off the grid, great, you can do that, but you don't have to have the panels on your home, because we've allocated a piece of property, far enough away in an open field that'll give the best solar efficiency, because there are no trees. So. Yeah.
And since there will be grid power plus solar,
Yes.
if your house has it, you can turn it off.
Correct. Yep.
And some of us don't sleep. I mean, we live without power anyway, so we'll just turn the whole thing off.
Yeah.
Well, great. That's all the questions I see coming in from the attendees. Mike, Kathy, you want to say the last remarks?
Well, it's Kathy's conversation, so she gets the last word today.
Oh, wow. Special.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just super excited, Mike, with your team. I'm really excited that you're moving forward with this. It's such a necessary thing, and I'm really excited to be a part of it. I'm really looking forward to seeing it come to fruition. And yeah, thanks for putting this effort in for all of us who are interested in it and who need it.
Well, thanks for helping us make it work and work right. So, all right. Well, Joe, thanks for getting us together. Karen, thanks for joining. And Kathy, look forward to seeing you back in Nicaragua one of these days.
Yeah, me
Thank
too.
you, Kathy.
You bet.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everybody.
Have a good one. Bye.